Hello everyone and welcome to a sentence of the day video, and today we're going to be analyzing this tweet here. So this was one of the sentence of the day posts that was put on by Irichika sensei, and what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be breaking down this sentence. Now as you can see, we can look at this sentence and we see, oh, there's so much kanji, there's so much vocabulary you may or may not know, and you think, how am I going to understand this sentence? Well, don't worry, we're going to break it down so you do understand. But the important thing today is neither the vocabulary nor the grammar, but the important thing is how do we build sentences in Japanese? So this is what we're going to be looking at today. We're going to be looking at how we can build a sentence in Japanese and what are the important components in a sentence, so that when we think about our own sentences, whether writing or speaking, we know how to convey ourselves. Now, one way to look at this sentence and break it down today could be to go from the beginning and work right until the end. However, when we talk in normal everyday speech, you do not think about the beginning of the sentence. We more think about what is the main content of what we want to say. What's the important bit we want to say? And even though we speak in an order form where everything is spoken in order, we're working towards talking about a main juicy bit of topic. So we're going to be looking at that, and we're going to be looking at how Japanese uses sentences. And so what important thing we're going to look at today is clauses. Now, clauses are sections of a sentence, let's say that. So you can have a main clause and a subordinate clause. Main clause is a bit of sentence that can stand by itself. So even if there's a big, long sentence like this, but within that sentence there's one small sentence, then that small sentence can go by itself and it will still make sense. A subordinate clause is a clause that needs to have another clause for it to make sense. It cannot go by itself and make sense. If we look at this sentence and look for examples of that, we can see here, for example, which is kokoro to karada ga tsukarenai. Now that by itself makes sense. This means mind or heart, but in this case mind, and body not tired. Tsukarenai means not tired. So that can stand by itself as a sentence in Japanese. You can take that out, you can say it, it would make sense. Although if you said it at random, obviously it would maybe not make sense, but point is, it makes sense by itself. If you look at this sentence at the top, Nihon ne itta toki ni. So this is saying Japan, Nihon, e itta, went to, when. So we got when I went to Japan. That doesn't make sense by itself. So that's our subordinate clause. Now, that's something that we can see, and that's something that we're going to look at as we analyze this sentence as a whole. Now the thing is with Japanese, the important thing is verbs. Verbs are the important point, important almost content in a Japanese sentence. So for example, if we look at this sentence, kokoro to karada ga tsukarenai, tsukarenai can be used by itself and it makes perfect sense in Japanese. Verbs can be used by itself and they make sense. This is important when we're looking to determine what our clause is. So if I say kokoro to karada ga by itself, it doesn't make sense. It needs extra information. So what we're going to do, first of all, I've talked a lot. Now you can just look at this. What do we see that stands out for you? And I'm talking visually. You can obviously see there's a lot of kanji, but if we're going to look at things in regards to clauses and sections of the sentence, what do you think would be important to us for further understanding? So if I was to choose, I would say that, and I'm going to do this in orange, this and this and this and this. That stands out to me. Now in Japanese these are quotation marks. So I'm going to guess that it's going to be sort of a sentence or a sentence that is within these quotation marks. Okay, so what we've got now, what else can we look at when we're looking for clauses? What do you think will be important? Well, we have commas. So I'm going to say that because we have commas, anything in between the commas must be a portion of sentence, a portion of content. So straight away, those are the first things that I've picked up on, and I'm just going to make a new layer so that we can look at extra stuff. So let me just focus on the red. So now what we're going to look at are we're going to look for the verbs in the sentence. As I go through the verbs, don't worry, I will put it at the side what the verbs are so that you can use them as reference as we go through the lesson. What we're going to look for next, then, what we're going to look for are verbs. Because like I said, in Japanese, verbs can be used by themselves. So verbs are very important in Japanese sentences to convey content. And verbs are generally important in many languages because they hold a lot of information. So, we're going to go through this tweet and we're going to look for the verbs that are in the sentence, and that might help us get an understanding of what the clauses are. So, first of all, we're going to go through from start to finish. 日本へ行った時に. So we said when I went to Japan. The verb here is went. It's 行った. Now usually 行った comes with え. So it's え行った, or it could be に行く or へ行く. So our verb basically is 行く, which is here. I'm going to put furigana so you can understand what's being said. 行く. So that's to go. So usually we can have に or へ行く. So に means going directly to a specific place for the specific purpose. So if I'm going to school, 学校に行く with the intention of going into the school. 学校へ行く on the other hand is going in that direction but doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to that place. So here, 日本へ行った時に, so when you going to Japan, so it's suggesting that we are going to Japan, but it's not saying we're going to be stopping and doing anything in Japan. It's just generally saying when you're in Japan, when I went to Japan, it's saying in that space of Japan, you might see things. It's a more general suggestion of going somewhere rather than going specifically to a place for a purpose. So we got the verb 行く to go. That's our first verb. So we're going to carry on. We have ストレス会社で頑張るあなたへ. I'm not going to translate this yet, but this is a verb 頑張る, which is to like work hard. So this is 頑張る. Sorry if my kanji drawing isn't up to scratch. It's actually quite bad. So we're going to just put in brackets because I haven't got no space. 頑張る, which means to, I might just move it across, to do your best. Okay, So there we go. To do your best, ganbaru. So we've got blah 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 blah. あなたへとか疲れた心と体を癒すグズ. So we've got 疲れた, which is coming from the verb 疲れる, which means to be tired. So here's our verb 疲れる, and here I'm just going to put 疲れる to be tired. Now we have another verb here 癒す, which is this, which means to cure or to heal. Let me just put it here. See if I can draw it as best as I can. Pardon me. I'm going to do this in brackets as I don't have space. 癒す to cure. So there's our verbs. So we've got one verb in the one quotation and two verbs in the next quotation. というものが売られていて. So now in this section we've got our verb here, which is 売られていて, which comes from 売る, which means to sell. 売る to sell. So here to sell. Okay, so that's here. Now we've got コーナーができるぐらい人気があったんだけど. So we've got できる, which is our verb, which means can, and has other meanings as well. Actually here it doesn't take the meaning for can as such, but I will explain what it means later. And we have あったん, which comes from ある, which means to have. ある to have. So we have that. だけどそもそもストレスがある会社をどうにかして then 心と体が as we said 疲れない状況を作ることが大切と思うので. So we've got three verbs in this. In the one before, we only have one verb. And at the end, いつかそんなぐずなくなったらなと思った. So we have なくなった, which comes from なくなる, which is to almost to say to not exist in this case, to not exist. And we have omo as well, which actually I need to put the other kanji as well. So we have tsukuru here, my bad, tsukuru, tsukuru, which is tsukuru, to make. We have nakunatta, to not exist, and we have a more. So we've gone through all the verbs now. So as you can see, we've got 9 verbs. So that's where we're going to start with. Now, what we've got to look for is, now what are the main clauses and what are the clauses that aren't so important? So the main clauses, again, are sentences that can stand by themselves and they still make sense. Clauses that aren't main clauses, subordinate clauses, they can't stand by themselves. Now, in Japanese, the way we build clauses are slightly different to English. And it's very interesting, actually. And I like this part of Japanese, and I'm going to try and explain it to you here. So, now we've gone through all the verbs. I'm going to try and change colour. Let's give it a light blue. Okay, and also I'm going to make a new layer. Okay, so if I just lock that. Okay, cool. So, what we've got here is, there's also something else I want to point out. Before I carry on, there's something I want to point out, and I want to go back to red to do this. And usually, again, we've got the omo, and what we have, interestingly, with the two omo, omotta and omo, is that we have the to particle. Now this to particle is quotation particle. So let's put that in the green. To equals quotation. In this context, to also means and, which we'll go over in a bit because it's in the sentence. But to is quotation. So you might say to you. So iyu means to say. I'll just write that here. Iyu, which is to say. Now this verb usually comes with the to before it if we're going to be saying something. So if you said blah blah blah, I said this, then you use to you at the end to say I said that. Or you could say to omo to say blah blah blah, to omo to say I thought, and it's everything before it. As you can see in Japanese, obviously things are not in the same order as English. And maybe we'll try and explain that as we go through this sentence. So I'm going to choose blue now. And in blue, we're going to look at, well, let's see. We're going to try and break down these sentences now and try and see what's the main clause and what things aren't the main clause. So, like I explained earlier, we separated the clauses by having commas. Great. So we're going to look at each section within the commas. I'm going to try and find what are the main bits of information. So, we've got Nihon e itta toki ni. Like I said, I'm going to put the, let's see. I'm going to put the vocabulary at the side, actually. I'm going to just, I think it'd be a nice contrasting colour. I'll keep blue. Vocab. So when we go through new vocab, we can explain that. So we've got Nihon, which is Japan, and let me just move this to the side actually, so we can have Nihon. E itta toki ni, again iku, but we have toki, which is here. So this is toki. I'll put the hiragana in brackets. So in this case, it's when. So toki ni is usually used as when. So toki ni. Remember that. What I usually do when looking at sentences, rather than looking at them as individual vocabulary, look at them as groups. So when I write down the vocabulary here, I should have put toki ni. I'm going to write them as groups of information. So when you can apply them to a sentence, you can know how to apply them straight away, without trying to think. Well, I'll explain what I mean again. So, hold on. So we got Nihon e itta toki ni. So we know this is an incomplete clause. So what we're going to do in green here, we're going to have incomplete, and in, I say, purple, we're going to have complete. Okay. So let's start with this green. So this is an incomplete, so we're going to just highlight that. Next, ストレス会社で頑張るあなたへ. So what we have here is we have ストレス, which means stress. So I'm not going to write the vocab. We have sorry, I've been reading this as 会社. So すみません. 社会, sorry. So here we go. 社会, which 会社 means company. 社会 means society. 社会. So ストレス会社で頑張るあなたへ. So we have again an incomplete clause. Why am I saying this is incomplete? Because if we see this, ストレス社会で頑張るあなたへ. So it's working hard in a stressful society, and then we have あなたへ. Now this is a strange thing about Japanese, and this is the thing I want to explain when I'm talking about clauses. Now this is an incomplete clause, but why exactly? We have a verb, like the other one, we have a verb, However, we end with anata e. Now, anata e, anata means you, and e means towards. So if you're writing a letter, you might say blah 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 e, and use the e particle. So I don't know, Tanaka-san e to Tanaka-san. So this is saying anata e, which is to you. So what we've got is to you, and then we've got all this information. So it's not complete, but what we have is that actually everything before anata is describing anata. Now, why do I come to this conclusion? It's because actually when we have verbs and they are followed by a noun without a particle or anything in between it, it means that the information before it is describing that noun. This means that we can have a lot of information going at once. So for example, we could really, if we're going to say the cat who jumped is here, we could say tobikonde ta, tobikonda neko wa koko de iru, or koko ni iru, sorry. So tobikonda neko ga koko ni iru. So the cat who jumped was here, and as you can see, tobikonde or tobikonda, which means to jump, precedes neko, which is cat, and tobikonda, all that information is describing the cat. So this is why verbs are important in Japanese. So in this case, because there's nothing between the noun and the verb, everything before it is describing the noun, which is anata e. Now this isn't a complete sentence because anata e suggests something towards you. So maybe it's a gift that is dedicated to yourself. So that's what it's implying, but we don't see it kind of explained here. So we have then toka, which means such as. So we have an incomplete clause, tsukareta kokoro to karada o yasuguzu. So tsukareta kokoro, again the same way, the verb precedes the noun. So we have tired mind and I guess tired body to heal. Goods. Again, what I'm going to look at now is this last part of the sentence. Guzu. Like I said, everything before the verb, if it's a verb and then it's a noun straight away, is describing this noun. Iyasu means to heal. Guzu, let's write the verbs there. Guzu is like goods or like items that you can find at the shop. So again, we have goods to heal your tired mind and body. That's how we describe it. That's what it means. Kokoro to karada. So again, tsukareta, and then we just have the noun straight away, a verb then the noun. So we go into this verb is describing this noun. This verb is also implying this noun as well. Tsukareta kokoro to tsukareta karada o yasuguzu. So again, this is not complete. Actually, this is only a noun, this clause. It's interesting in Japanese. You can have a clause which is just a noun as an incomplete clause. So the main bit of information is guzu, goods, the goods. Everything before it is extra information. The verbs are important because they're describing what kind of goods they are. But it's not enough. We need a verb that's going to describe what are these goods doing, or what's going on with them, what's happening with them. Which is why we carry on. というものが売られていて. So now we have 売られていて, which comes from, again, 売る to sell. But this is giving us enough information. So what we have here, if we're going to bring it out into a macrocosm, we have, when you go to Japan, you have stressful society things for stressful society. Like I said, it's implied. Toka, goods that help heal your mind and body. So such as toka again is such as, so such as this, such as that. Toyu mono. Now toyu mono means these sorts of things. So mono is things. Toyu in this case is these kinds of things. And these follow, perhaps if you're listing some items, you're saying at a supermarket, a super de toka, ringo toka, banana toka, というものを、というものがある. So you're saying they had these sorts of things at the supermarket. They have apples, bananas, and these sorts of fruit. Again, here they have these sorts of items, というもの, these sorts of things. Actually, という, this という comes from this to say, という, という. However, when we're saying it in this context, we're meaning these sorts of things. It's kind of become used so often it's lost its meaning. It's almost saying that these sorts of things, to say almost these sorts of things, sort of things. So it's kind of lost its meaning, but that's what it means. So I will just write it here. So we have toka, which is such as, and we have toiyu mono, which is like these sorts of items. Actually, I'm going to put mono. I'm not going to put all the vocabulary here. I'm going to put the important stuff, and the important thing is mono, which is things in this case. But even important is the urareteite. Urareteite. Now this is completing our clause. So why? Because we're ending with urareteite. Now we could use urareteiru, and this te at the end of verbs is used to suggest that we're continuing with the point. But the full verb will be urareteiru, and so that would be to sell. So we can say that we can complete the sentence if we just change the conjugation of this, and this could be a complete sentence. So I'm going to put that all in purple. So the very, very most important thing in this sentence, actually, now we're going to look at it even further, is, I'm going to put this in a darker green, is mono ga urarete iru. Because everything here is just extra information. But this is just things are being sold, or things are selling. So that's our main information that we can use by itself, and everything else is extra information to add. Now, as you can see in Japanese, a lot of the time the main bulk of information comes at the end, and that's why we usually have verbs at the end of a sentence in Japanese, and the verbs are the important part that can be used by themselves. Likewise, we could just say urareteiru, and it wouldn't make sense so to speak, but if we're talking about like structurally, it makes sense as a sentence by itself. So this is a complete clause. We have separate clauses. The quotations are separate clauses. Everything in the quotations. We have the when I went to Japan. We have the mono ga urareteite or urareteiru, which is suggesting that that is a complete sentence by itself. Now, if we carry on, we have コーナーができるぐらい人気があったんだけど. Now, I'll quickly point out that だけど, and I'll put this in a sort of I guess I'll put it in blue because we haven't got blue in the analyzing. So だけど, that means but. So I'm going to put that here. kedo, that means but. So again, we'll continue in the sentence, and we know at the end we're going to have a but point. So we're going to give a different perspective of information after that but. So actually, from urarete ite, because we got the te used at the end of a verb, it's used to suggest that we're going to further and carry on with the information. So this is going to further and carry on with the information. コーナができるぐらい人気があったんだ. That's our sentence. The kedo is just an extra bit of our clause, but we could say, again, this is a complete sentence because it has the verb at the end. The verb is aru. So we have コーナができる. That in itself could be a complete sentence. コーナができる. Just like 疲れた心 could be. No, actually, no, it's not. Sorry. ストレス社会で頑張る. That could be its own sentence because it has the verb at the end. It would make sense by itself. Here, コーナができる. Now, コーナ means corner. So we're saying できるぐらい人気があったんだ. So let's just break down this part. 人気がある. Now, 人気がある means to be popular, or literally to have popularity. So we've just got 人気がある. So to be popular. 人気がある to be popular. So that is a phrase that you can remember. So like I said, remember chunks of information rather than just vocabulary by itself without the context, because we need to use the vocabulary in a suitable context. So we need a bigger chunk of information. So we got 人気がある. So what is it saying? コーナができる. Can corner? That doesn't make sense. Like I said, dekiru means can, but in this case it doesn't. So in this case what we have is we have two sentences, and we have this gurai, which in this case means to the extent of. So what we got, the main clause in this, the main bit of information is 人気があった. 人気があったんだ. That's the main portion of information. Actually, gurai is a noun, and like I said, when you have verbs before, when you have verbs before nouns, it means that the verb and everything before is describing that noun. So we could say コーナができるぐらい. Now, ぐらい, it's not really a noun, but because we can see it as a noun in this case, it's saying to the extent of it's having its own corner in the shop. コーナができる, its own section in the shop. So that's what it means, コーナ in this case. So 人気がある in this case would be to be popular to the extent that it has its own corner in the shop. That's what it says. So actually, like I said, 人気がある is the main part of the sentence, and everything else before it is describing the 人気がある. Now if we carry on, けどそもそもストレスがある社会をどうにかして. Soストレスがある means to have stress. So remember that as a whole thing. ストレスがたまる means to increase more, like you're getting more and more stress and increase in stress. So in the first place, そもそも. So this is going to be our but part of the sentence. Like this is going to switch. So we're talking about initially the fact that they've got all these goods when you go to Japan. They've got all these products that help you and make you feel better. They're so popular. That's all that information. But now we're going to be going on to the next section. Somo somo. In the first place, somo. Somo. So, in the first place, now what we have is we can just see ストレスがある社会を. So this 社会, again, is a noun. ある is a verb. So everything is describing the noun. Now the そもそも, because it's a sort of it's not a connective. It is a word that is giving us some context. Like how we had 日本へ行った時に, that's giving us context. そもそも in the first place is giving us context. It's not directly linked to the society. So this そもそも is going to describe the whole of the clause rather than just the 社会, because of the type of word it is. So what I've got and what I'm going to do is, with dark blue, I'm going to mark out the clauses, bits of sentence that could stand by itself, but in this case they are part of a larger sentence, and I'll put purple as the complete clause within the tweet. So for example, this is a complete sentence. I'm stressed. I have stress. And in the full sentence, well, it's an incomplete clause actually, which would be this. Remember, we're marking by the commas. So in the first place, a society without stress, a society with stress, sorry, somehow, どうにかして, which means somehow. Now this clause doesn't end with a verb. So actually what we've got then is it's an incomplete clause, because we've got this どうにかして, which means somehow, and like 時に, which means when, it's implying that we're looking for more information to give us context. So this whole thing is an incomplete clause, and we can mark it as such. So 心と体が疲れない. So what we've got here is we've got, like I said, a clause that would make sense by itself. A mind and body that's not tired. But if we carry on, we've got 状況を作る. Again, we've got a separate clause by itself. 状況を作る, to create the conditions. 状況 means like conditions, the situation. So I know we're getting more and more vocabulary, so I just write them here, and what I put here is 状況. So this is our conditions. So ことが大切と思う. Again, we have a verb, and what we have is we have can I draw? Excellent. We have another. Oh my gosh. Okay, hold on a minute. Let me just get back on my feet. 大切と思う. I think it's important. 大切と思う. Usually と思う, when it's by itself, is usually referring to, if it's got no one else's opinion, like it's got no other pronoun. If it's got no pronoun, like this sentence doesn't have a pronoun, like I or me or you, then tomo suggests I. It means this is what I think in particular. So here we have three small groups of sentences, and you can remember these as phrases. Like you got mind and body tired, you have to create the conditions. Important, I think it's important. 大切と思う, I think it's important. So three separate sentences you can remember as groups. Okay, So this whole thing could be a complete clause because we end with a verb. It's not a complete clause because we have the node, which means, in this case, because. So I'll just try and go over that in a bit. But this whole thing makes sense because it's got a verb at the end which is rounding off our clause as complete. So we could say, I think it's important to create the conditions where the mind and body is not tired. So actually, that's what the sentence is. So that can be a complete sentence by itself. If we add it with the incomplete clause, we have そもそもストレスがある社会をどうにかして心と体が疲れない状況を作ることが大切と思う. Actually, it's saying in the first place, somehow should have a society where somehow okay, hold on. In the first place, somehow a society with stress, we should somehow create the conditions where mind and body people aren't tired, and I think that's important. In the first place, that's important. So somo is describing all that information. Again, どうにかして, you got this して at the end. Although どうにかして is a phrase, again, like 売られていてどうにかして, we've got that to suggest that we're carrying our point forward, and that's not the end of the sentence. The node is because in the first place, in a stressful society, if we somehow create the conditions where people are stressed, and I think this is important, いつかそんなぐずなくなったらなと思った. So we have this final sentence here. いつかそんなぐずなくなったらなと思った. So we have, what do we have that's the important thing? We have the verbs. So that's why we can say this is a complete clause, because we have the tomo at the end, or tomotta, which is I thought. So that is a verb that's completing our sentence. So いつかそんなぐずなくなったらなと思った. So we have いつか, which means one day. I'll put that here. いつか, which means one day. そんなぐず, these types of products, you see, these types of items, なくなったらなと思った. So one day these goods will not exist, I think. So it's almost saying, because if we create a society where people are not tired, and in this stressful society, if we create those conditions, then these goods will not need to exist. And that's how the sentence basically runs within itself. So it's saying, somehow in the first place, if we consider these things as important, in this case, because it's saying 大切と思う, I would say that I think that's important, but because we're talking about, like, in the first place, and we're talking about society, it's referring to, if we consider these things as important in society, because if we consider these things as important, not that being because, then one day these things will not need to exist. So let's look at the whole sentence. So as you can see, we've got several purple, which is like the main clauses, and we've got all these greens, which are small clauses, and we've got these other clauses, these blue ones, which are suggesting that we could use those by themselves. And I'll just put a few more in that I didn't have from before. They could just be clauses by themselves. So this again, kokoro to karada o yurusu, the heal, mind and body. We have again, mono ga urarete ite. We could just say this is a clause by itself if we didn't have the root at the end. We've got ninki ga tanda, a clause by itself. Kona ga dekiru, again, clause by itself. So we can see that the important information, we can see a pattern in clauses that are complete. There's a verb at the end, and that makes it complete. And that's why, if there's one thing that you take from this lesson and you're confused about, but there's one thing that's really important to take from this lesson, is that think of the verb in your mind first. Think of verbs. They're super important in Japanese, because you can say verbs by themselves, like taberu, and it means I'm eating. And straight away, you don't have to add any other information. So remember, verbs are that important. And that means when you're trying to speak in Japanese and work towards a point, think about the verb that you're working towards. So, like in here, let's look at the last sentence. So we're looking at these goods not existing. So we're looking at itsuka sonna mono naku nattara na to omotta. See how I replace gutsu with mono? So you can replace nouns and stuff, but in my mind, I'm still working towards the nakunattara. I've just replaced the noun with a different noun. So see, if I'm thinking about noun, then I'm working towards that noun in my mind, and I'm speaking around it, extra information. I'm walking towards the verb, and I'm saying extra information. So if there's going to be an order and hierarchy of things, I'd say the verb is important, and then the noun. And then anything else is extra information. Now, something I didn't point out while looking at this is actually what you can see is in complete sentences that are put as complete sentences, there's always a particle of some sorts. Now, particles are important, again, in separating different sentences. So, ninki ga aru. We have kona ga dekiru. Stressu shakai de gambaru. Nihon e itta toki ni. We have itsuka sono guzu. Now this doesn't have the particle, but we could have sono guzu ga nakunattara na to omotta. So we can see taisetsu to omou joukyo o tsukuru. So if I'm going to put in pink as a final thing, we have all these particles that help make up our sentence. So before the particle, we have the noun. After the particle, we have the verb. There's a nice pattern to look at. So we have the noun, we have the verb. We have the noun, jokyo, we have o, verb. We have the taisetsu, to, and we have the verb. We have an implied, it would be an implied. So the particle would go here. Noun, and then the verb. So if there's one thing we're thinking of verb, and then we're thinking of noun in the order of hierarchy. And in between, for making a sentence, we have a particle in the middle. So, finally, let's try and read this sentence. Nihon e itta toki ni. So, when I went to Japan, stressu shakai de gambaru anata e toka, tsukareta kokoro to karada o iyasu gutsu toyu mono ga urarete ite. So we have, when I went to Japan, they were selling things such as, see how I went instantly to toyu mono ga urarete ite after that time clause. I've gone straight to they were selling things such as, because that's our main bit of information. They were selling things such as to you who's striving hard in a stressful society, or things or goods that help heal a tired mind and body. So they even had, to the extent it was that popular, to the extent it had its own corner in the shop. コーナーができるぐらい人気があったんだけど、but in the first place そもそもストレスがある社会をどうにかして somehow in a stressful society心と体が疲れない状況を作ることが大切と思う。If you consider to make the conditions so that mind and body isn't stressed and consider that important because if we did thatいつかそんなぐずなくなったらなと思った。Then these goods wouldn't need to exist in the first place. So you can see in the first place is referring more to that final clause. In the first place, such goods wouldn't need to be exist if we created the conditions where mind and body wasn't tired. So that's the sentence today. Again, there was a lot of information. You notice I didn't break down all of the grammar points today, and I didn't think there was a need to as such, because the important thing is seeing how a sentence works in Japanese rather than understanding what this grammar point is and what this grammar point is. I have explained some grammar, and maybe as we've gone through the lesson you can see certain patterns with the grammar, and I was thinking about going into grammar at the beginning, but now the important thing is to just look at the sentence and see how do we make a sentence. The important thing is the verb, then the next thing is the noun, and the verb and the noun is connected by a particle, and that is the essential building blocks for building any sentence in Japanese. Everything else around it is just extra detail to add to that basic structure. So, if you remember that from the lesson, that is the most important thing. And thank you for listening. Obviously, if you have any questions or anything, suggest them in the comments. And yeah, I will try to break down other sentences in the future as well, so you can see how sentences work in Japanese. So yeah, thank you.